So I hope you're all well. This is the overview video for the May workshop. So for the part-time students, this is the first workshop on module 3 of the MA, and for the part-time students, the workshop which goes over some of the teaching that they've already received. As a bit of a background to the weekend, the full-time students, they will be attending, although as you probably know from the workshop outline, Nokwazi and Chile will be leaving in early June, so we're having a party on Saturday night to bid them farewell. We will hear from the full-timers about where they are currently, which this term their teaching focuses on a process of analysis of data that comes out of interviews and questionnaires, and starting to write up, because the full-timers will be submitting their draft version of the dissertation at the end of June and the final version in September. So it'll be good to see them and hear from them. For part-time students, this weekend is the Introduction to Research Methods. So the first of 2 weekends for critically important final module before, all being well, fieldwork starts over the summer and we recommence teaching in year 2. So with the particular focus of the module for the part-time students, what's really important to say then on Tuesday is the session starts with an introduction to module 3, the kind of key learning outcomes, what we hope we can cover during module 3, with a particular focus that morning on something called research design, which is in effect, what are you going to research and how will you do it? Issues around selecting a suitable set of research methods, dealing with issues around ethics, and identifying the most practicable, suitable process to actually undertake the research and then move forward to analyse it. We'll also be looking at issues around something called the literature review, which is in effect a kind of summary of the key understanding, the kind of key academic knowledge of the subject you want to look at for the dissertation as it stands now. Although what we will do between the 4 till 6 session is John Sterling will join us and give us a kind of expert academic external perspective on the role of the literature review in providing the kind of overall structure for the dissertation. John's had a huge input on the MA, both teaching and as a supervisor, so I'm really pleased he can join us for this weekend. John will join us again for the guest speaker slot 7 till 9 and focus on his actual work and his academic work around Sierra Leone after the Civil War and the process of rebuilding the trade union and labour movement, and an insight on that process and where we are now. Saturday, as you know from the outline, we're spending a day of culture and history, joining many others at the Levellers Day event in Burford. We'll know by then the outcome of the general election, and hopefully, as Burford is in David Cameron's constituency, we are celebrating. But let's see what we're doing at that point. Saturday, before we have the party in the evening, we're joined by Sarah Avia and Bev Woodburn to talk about their experience in the Focus E15 campaign, which some of you would have followed. Last year was a major campaign led principally by a group of young women fighting against the sale of social housing and their dispersal around the country. It's a really important campaign to look at and analyse and interpret. On Sunday, we'll return to the key issues around the dissertation research, and I'll be looking in particular in the morning at issues around undertaking, or starting and undertaking, comparative research and working collaboratively across different cultures. I then want to move on to issues relevant for the research proposal and the reflexive assignment as well, and what are expectations really. So we'll finish that session hopefully with a helpful focus on the next 2 assignments. The next 2 videos that will follow mine come from an event that Chile and I attended at Loughborough, one from Fabiola Miras around a project she's involved with regarding forced and traffic labour in supply chains, and then Jason Moyersley from the Independent Workers Union of Great Britain around a new union that formed out of the Three Coasters campaign, which some of you would have followed last year, the year before, which came up with a very difficult dispute involving migrant domestic workers at University College in London. Really important insight on how a new union was created, and hopefully Jason will join us at some point in year 2. Okay folks, thank you very much. See you in a few weeks. Bye bye. Okay, Fabiola, thanks for freeing up some time. So just for the benefit of the MA students, we're here at the Loughborough University, 23rd, 24th of April. It's the event that's organised by Maurizio Azzini, who you met at the October workshop, and it's the Activists and Researchers Forum on Precarious Work. And I just wanted Fabiola just to introduce yourself and to talk about the current projects she's involved in at Durham University. Thanks, Fabiola.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening. My name is Fabiola, as I said. I'm currently working as a research associate in a project on forced labor in supply chains at the University of Durham. My previous research looked at recruitment in international migration and the ways in which labor contractors are constructing local, regional and national labor markets and the implications that these forms of fragmentation have for migrant workers in particular. I focused on the agriculture sector, but in the project I'm being part of at the moment at Durham University, we're looking at global initiatives around trafficking and forced labor in supply chains. But the initiative, so basically the aim of the project is to understand what are different actors doing in terms of shaping and understanding the problem of forced labor in their supply chains at a local scale, but also at a regional scale. And the main issue is to look at the trafficking and forced labor that occurs outside European borders, but the benefits are coming to Europe. So the products that you consume, your favorite shops, for girls particularly, Topshop, all the brands, where are these products coming from? Who are doing them for us? And where are they placed within the long supply chain of production? So we're trying to understand what the place of the worker is within the supply chain, but actually what initiatives are emerging in terms of the companies. Are they responding with more corporate social responsibility? Are they engaging with more labor organizing? Or are migrant workers able to organize themselves, or even local laborers, not only migrants? And what are governments doing? What is International Labour Organization doing as well? So all this myriad of initiatives in different sectors, we're trying to understand their logics and the ways in which they frame particular understandings of global production. So we're going to focus on 4 sectors. One is the supply chain of construction. We're interested in the ways in which universities and important companies and even art galleries are building a lot in the Middle East, and most of the labor that is used there is under something called the kafala system, which is a sponsorship system where the worker is completely tied to the employer, and there are a lot of instances of forced labor by, for instance, retention of documents. So we want to understand more what we can do in that particular context. We're also going to look at electronics. So what is driving your mobile phones, our computers, what are actually companies doing in terms of the long tiers of the supply chains to diminish the abuses or eradicate them completely. The other sector we're looking at is fishing, and this was prompted by a documentary published by The Guardian on slavery, some people call it, in the prawns industry. So we want to understand more how the supply chain of fishing works. And the last sector that I'd like to share more about now is agriculture. And we're focusing on the Fair Food Program, which is a program conducted by the Coalition of Immokalee Workers in Florida that has managed to provide an understanding of the food system in the United States, and through the penny per pound program they made retailers pay more for the tomatoes that they sell in their products, and that money is passed on to the workers. So the workers in the pay slips, they see this premium that they get. And a lot of other things that I invite you to read more about if you're interested in the Fair Food Program in the Coalition of Immokalee Workers website. We are going to conduct fieldwork with them. So I also invite you to visit our website, which is a broader project funded by the European Union called Demand AT. So it's looking at the demand side of trafficking measures. So we know a lot about the supply, how the workers get in these situations or how they are supplied, but we need to understand to make more connections about the demand side.
Sure.
So what can we do as consumers as well of all these products that nowadays are being produced at a very global scale,
sure.
right, in more interconnected ways.
That's fantastic. Just one thing I'd like to just focus on particularly, because I'm going to be doing a session soon on workers' education, trade education.
Oh, yeah.
You referred yesterday in your presentation to popular education as a strategy used by the Immokalee workers.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just tell the MA students at Ruskin just a little bit about that strategy and how it works?
Absolutely. One of the key aspects of the Fair Food Program is that it's completely changing the conceptualization of what constitutes corporate social responsibility by basically turning it upside down, so making like a reverse logics of this. I'm proposing a worker-driven social responsibility model.
Right.
And one of the key pillars of this model is that it is drafted by the workers themselves. So workers are the ones who experience the everyday reality of having to do the harvest. So they have a say on different aspects. For instance, I mentioned yesterday the elimination of overfilling of the buckets when they are harvesting the tomatoes. And another key aspect of the project, which is the monitoring, is a worker-to-worker education. So basically this means that workers and a member of the coalition of Immokalee workers train the farm workers who are going to start the season, and they do the training on the growers' premises before the employment, and it's part of the job to know what the labor rights are and what they need to expect. So in this way, workers can also monitor other workers, right? And they know what their rights are, and they have a more sense of empowerment. And the other important aspect is that within the program there is a 24-hour line to file complaints. So if they see something that is not working, for instance, they don't get the breaks, there are not enough shades, that needs to be provided according to the different organization of the farms, they can call this line and say there's not enough water, the toilets are not in the condition, and there is no retaliation against the workers to do that. And that is a massive improvement in the context of the very industrialized agriculture system, and it's the one in the United States that some important scholars have coined it like factories in the fields, such as Wells, for instance. These are massive improvements, and these things are being overseen by workers. So the Immokalee workers, as they are a community-based organization made of many migrant workers from Guatemala, Haiti, and Mexico, they are pretty much inspired by this idea of popular education and this idea of leadership. So they always say, todos somos líderes, we are all leaders. It's organized in a very horizontal structure. So that's why they managed to include this in the monitoring aspect of the worker-driven social responsibility model. And the last aspect, of course, is the enforcement. And one of the key interesting things of this program is that they see the enforcement through a market mechanism. Basically, the growers who are not complying with the program, they are penalized by not being able to participate for a few months until they resolve the situation.
Wonderful. Fabiola, I know it's only a short interview, but I just wanted students just to have a flavour of the project, because I'd like to invite you to Ruskin to speak to the MA students, and I will pass on details of the event on June the 3rd. But thank you very much for your time and just for this short interview.
No, thank you so much.
We have a lot of campaigns, but that's a good example, because we started in a different union. We ran up against the bureaucracy of that union. We had some serious decisions to make about leaving the union. So that's kind of a good case study. So, and then we're going to show a video, and then Gabriela is also going to talk about the Three Cosas campaign. So I'm just going to tell about the part when we were in unison up until when we left. We'll see the video, and then Gabriela will talk about when we were in the IWGP. So a bit of background information on the IWGP. We have about 600 members. And the majority are low-paid migrant workers, mainly Latin American cleaners in London. We're organized in 5 branches. So we have a tiny branch in the southwest of England, in Plymouth. We have the University of London branch, which is mainly outsourced workers, the central administration of the University of London. We have the Cleaners and Facilities branch, which is mainly Latin American cleaners working in the private sector in London. Couriers and Logistics branch, which is the push bike couriers in London. They just started getting organized in a campaign for the London Living Wage. And we have Security Guards branch in London. The union was founded in August of 2012, and it comes as an outgrowth from the big unions. So the people that founded the IWGB were originally organizers in the Unite Justice for Cleaners campaign. And they had a lot of problems with the Unite campaign. Some of them tried to run as candidates in elections, and their candidacies were blocked. Also, they felt that the people running the campaign signed a number of deals which were not beneficial to the workers. So for those and other reasons, they left and joined the IWW, Industrial Workers of the World, and developed the cleaners branch there. But after a while, they had some difficulties there as well, because they felt that they couldn't get full control of the resources that their members were bringing in to use for campaigning. And there were some political tensions within the IWW that organizers who went on to found the IWGB felt like there was some pressure from them to kind of toe the union line politically, and they didn't have full liberty to campaign in the way they wanted to. And then about 6 months after the IWGB was formed, it was formed in August of 2012, the University of London branch came into it, and there was about 100 workers who came. That's when I joined the union, and we're all in unison before. We have a number of, we focus mainly on campaigns, so we have a number of different London living wage campaigns, and we've had some campaigns for improved terms and conditions, such as sick pay, holidays, and pensions, as well as campaigns against victimization and bullying. And we've organized a number of kind of high-profile workplaces in London, such as University of London, John Lewis, the Barbican, Clifford Chance, Royal Opera House, and we're now starting to organize among cleaners at UCL. So I'll tell you a little bit about Three Cosas. It's a long story. It started in 2011 and went until about 2014, or you could argue that's still going on today. In spring of 2011, we started organizing at the central administration of the University of London. The University of London is a huge federal university with a number of constituent colleges like UCL, LSE, King's. And the central administration is like the headquarters of all of that. So there's a number of academic buildings, including Senate House, and at the time there were 8 intercollegiate student halls of residence, where students at all these colleges go and live. At the time, spring 2011, the central administration of the university outsourced with 2 main companies. One was Aramark, which is a multinational that does catering, and the other one was Balfour Beatty Workplace, and they did total facilities management. So they did everything from cleaning, security, maintenance, portering, and at the time, in total, there were nearly 400 outsourced workers. Now, the majority of these workers were earning just above the minimum wage. So the cleaners were earning £6.15 per hour. And it was a non-unionized workforce. So out of nearly 400 workers, fewer than 20 were in Unison, which was the only union that was there. So in the spring of 2011, Unison started English classes. They started a recruitment campaign, and they initiated a London living wage campaign. And the combination of those 3 things led to a massive drive to join the union. And within about 6 months, over 120 outsourced workers had now joined Unison. But disillusion with Unison started almost immediately. The workers had pay problems that didn't get resolved. There were grievances that weren't launched. The Spanish-speaking workers, most of the cleaners are Latin American, the Spanish-speaking workers found it difficult to communicate with the English-speaking officials. And the outsourced workers had no voice in the union. So after months of unjustified and unresolved wage deductions, the workers got sick of waiting on Unison and staged a wildcat unofficial strike on the 1st of September 2011. So this wasn't sanctioned. It was the first strike that had ever been done by outsourced workers at the University of London. And within 3 days, £6,000 in overdue wages was paid to the workers. So that's what really kicked off the activism among outsourced workers. Now, on the back of this strike, 3 weeks later came a voluntary recognition agreement. So Balfour Beatty voluntarily recognized Unison for the purposes of collective bargaining. And the reason was they wanted to avoid this type of situation kind of getting out of control. So they saw it very much as a self-interest thing. But it was a huge victory for the workers, because now the company had to consult with the union and the workers' reps before they made any major changes. And the reps also got paid time off to attend union meetings and this type of thing. And 1 month after the strike, the University of London began a phased implementation of the London Living Wage. So we'd been campaigning for a while, but the strike kind of pushed it over the edge. And that's how we won the London Living Wage at the University of London. Now, the union recognition agreement brought problems because prior to that, the Senate House branch, which is the University of London branch of Unison, was pretty much dead. They had monthly committee meetings, and the committee members were made up almost entirely of direct employees of the university. So there were librarians, admin, editors, whatever. They were almost entirely British, native English speakers, university educated. So it's a very different group of workers with different problems and different priorities. Now, overnight, the committee was transformed because with the recognition agreement, the cleaners reps now could send people to the committee, and half the committee became Latin American cleaners who didn't speak English. So the committee meetings needed to be interpreted, so they took twice as long. And these workers were talking about different issues. They wanted to talk about campaigning for the London Living Wage to push for a faster implementation. They wanted to talk about pay problems and this type of thing. So the tensions between the officials running the branch and the outsourced workers' reps started then. So the officials didn't really support the London Living Wage campaign. They maybe came down once or twice and gave a speech at a protest. On paper, they said they supported it, but they were very reluctant to allocate any funds. The branch had thousands of pounds in reserves, and they didn't actively campaign for it. This was mostly the workers doing it with support of students and some of the members of the committee, but not the chair and vice chair and the key positions. Now, in July of 2012, the London Living Wage was finally implemented, because they phased implementation over a number of months, which ended up being about a 30%, just under a 30% pay increase. So it was a big pay increase. But at that time, the outsourced workers reps took the decision that it was good to win the London Living Wage, but it wasn't nearly enough for decent working conditions. So they wanted to continue to campaign for better terms and conditions, in particular in 3 areas, and that's sick pay, holidays, and pensions. And they chose these 3 for 2 reasons. One is because they had such inferior terms and conditions in these areas. And 2, because the discrepancy between their terms and conditions and the direct employees' terms and conditions in these areas was huge. So the outsourced workers, most of them were on statutory sick pay, which you may know is the first 3 days you're ill, you don't get anything. And from the 4th consecutive day, you get £85 per week, which obviously you can't pay rent or buy food on. Holidays, they're on a statutory minimum, so they have the 8 bank holidays and then 20 holidays in the year. And pensions, almost none of them had a company pension. Now, if you look at the direct employees at the time, the people who were working in the same building, for sick pay, depending on length of service, they had up to 6 months full pay sick pay. So they could get sick for 6 months in the year and still have their salary, plus 6 months half pay, plus the £85 that the cleaners got. For holidays, they got 25 or 30 days holiday, plus 8 bank holidays, plus 6 school closure days, and some of them for length of service got a top-up day every once in a while. For pensions, many of them were in the Sol pension scheme, which enjoyed 13% employer contributions above and beyond the salary. So the discrepancies in these 3 things were huge. Now, they wanted to launch a campaign for the 3 things, and as most of the activists among the outsourced workers were Spanish-speaking, they called the campaign Three Cosas, which means 3 things in Spanish. From the beginning, the Unison officials were unsupportive of the campaign. In the beginning, they just kind of ignored it and allowed it to develop on its own. So we started promoting the campaign. We developed a presence on Facebook and Twitter and this type of thing. The London region of Unison was actively against it. But the head office of Unison, the national office, showed some interest. So they invited us to an event in Parliament, and they were going to try and get some press contacts to help us get publicity. And at one point, it got to a point where they said, well, listen, we'd love to keep helping you. We can get you money, we can get you publicity, we can get you everything you need. But you need to have the support of your local branch. And we said, well, that's not a problem. The committee, half of them are outsourced workers, the other half are direct employees, and the majority of them are sympathetic. It's just a few people at the top who don't like it. So we'll just put a vote. And in November of 2012, at a committee meeting, we presented a motion to have the branch officially back the campaign and a motion to allocate a modest budget for the campaign. We had the numbers to win the vote, but the vice chair of the branch, who was chairing the meeting, blocked the vote. And he refused to allow it to come to a vote. And we had 4 people who were members of the committee asking for a vote, and he wouldn't allow a vote. And at the end of the meeting, the branch secretary stood up and slammed their hands on the table and said, "I'm the secretary, I don't support this," and stormed out of the room. So we're left wondering what to do. And there was a big debate about whether we should leave Unison. That's not what we wanted to do, but we realized that it clearly wasn't enough for us to have a majority of committee members on the committee, because there was no democracy. So the debate was, should we leave Unison, or should we run in the upcoming branch elections and take over the branch, the chair, the vice chair, all the key positions? So after some debate, we decided to run in the elections. So we put together a mixed slate of candidates between sympathetic direct employees and outsourced worker activists. So our candidate for chair is a guy named Danny, who is an editor at the University of London. And our candidate for vice chair is Sonia Chura, who you'll see in the video in a minute. And she was a Bolivian cleaner at one of the student halls of residence. So that was, we had a mixed, 20 candidates, a mix like that between outsourced workers and direct employees. Unison engaged in voter suppression tactics that would make US Republicans proud. They, at first, well, first of all, they said, unlike the way we've done elections, every year in this branch, which has always been a show of hands vote in the AGM, this year we're going to do a postal ballot. So that was the first undemocratic decision they took. And we said to them, a postal ballot is going to disproportionately disenfranchise Black American cleaners. They move homes all the time. Their membership information is not up to date. They don't speak English. When they get something in the mail from Unison, they don't look at it because they don't understand it. Their relationship with the union is oral via the reps and the people that are bilingual. So if you do that, there's going to be lots of people who were left out. And they just ignored that and sped ahead. So we said, okay, well, can you give us, when I say we, I mean me and a few of the other bilingual activists, but can you give us the membership records and we can go down and call them one by one and make sure that we get their up-to-date address. And they refused to do that. They wouldn't give us the membership records, data protection. So, okay, we'll do this the hard way. We went around to all the workplaces and said, listen, if you've changed address in the past year and a half, please let me know so we can call it in. So I remember one time I called Unison London Region and I had 5 names and addresses, new addresses. And they wouldn't let me call in an address change because I wasn't the worker, I wasn't an elected official. Okay. Unsurprisingly, on the first day that everyone was meant to receive ballots, 10% of the workforce didn't receive them. We called in and said, listen, this person didn't get a ballot, can you resend it to this address? And they said, no, only the worker can request the ballot, because it's a relationship between the worker and the union. We said, well, these workers, they don't speak English, you don't speak Spanish, so how do you expect that to happen? I said, well, we have this one guy named Mario, and he speaks Spanish, so they can call and ask for him. So over 3 weeks, workers had to call in and try and get this one guy, who wasn't particularly friendly, just as an anecdote, and try and get the ballots resent. And they ended up getting a number of them resent, but still there were a number of people who, at the end of the 3-week period, weren't able to vote. The Unison officials also broke a number of electoral rules. So there's a rule that said incumbent candidates can't use their union facilities time and whatnot to campaign because they had access to the workers during work time in workplace, which we didn't have. So they would go conduct union meetings and then kind of give a little campaign speech at the end, which they weren't allowed to do. We made a complaint about that, and that got ignored. Right off the bat, when we presented the candidacies, half of the outsourced worker candidates were disqualified. So one of them is a guy named Robinson, who is an active union member, one of the most active outsourced workers at University of London. And he was an official in the union branch. He went to all the committee meetings, and he represented the union in official capacity in the recognition agreement meetings with the company. Now, it turns out when he presented his candidacy, he wasn't actually a member of the union, because 3 months before, his payment bounced because there were missing £2 in his bank account. No one had bothered to tell him, and then his membership had lapsed, and they wouldn't let him rejoin to become a candidate. And because he had nominated another outsourced worker to be a candidate, even though that other outsourced worker membership's records was up to date, they disqualified that guy too. So right off the bat, they disqualified half of our candidates. Now, I wrote a long report about this, about 20 pages, citing all the electoral rules they were breaking in their favor, and the ones they were rigidly enforcing against us, and sent it to the National Executive Committee and the head people at Unison National. They passed it back down to London Region, and London Region passed it back down to the regional manager for her to investigate, and she was the one who approved the decision. So unsurprisingly, she found that she had taken the right decision a month earlier. Despite all that, we're sure we won the elections because the incumbent candidates simply did not have the numbers. They were there because they'd never been part of a contested election before. They didn't have a support base. They were just the only ones who were willing to do the job at the time. And we spent 3 weeks getting in votes. We tallied how many votes that we had confirmed, that we had sent in. And we're positive there's no way numbers-wise that they could have won despite all of this. Now, on the day the electoral results were supposed to be announced, they postponed it, and Unison said, we're investigating some complaints. And it turns out they're investigating complaints against us rather than the complaints that we made against them. And then they postponed it again and just kept kicking the can down the road. And 3 weeks after the elections were supposed to be announced, Unison invalidated the elections without announcing the results. And they gave 2 reasons for this. One was because during the elections, a student at SOAS wrote an article about how the incumbent candidates were breaking electoral rules and published it in a student newspaper. Now, the student was not a member of Unison. The student newspaper had no connection to Unison. But Unison said that was a justification for invalidating the elections because the newspaper article could have influenced how people voted. The other reason is because they had to resend so many ballots. Nearly 10% of the voters, or the members, didn't receive ballots. They had to resend those. And they said that was way too high a number, and that was the other reason for invalidating. Despite the fact that we told them that that precisely is what was going to happen, because they didn't bother to update membership records. After that happened, it was a no-brainer for us, and we left Unison en masse and joined the IWGB and set up the University of London branch of the IWGB. And because we spent the previous 4 or 5 months putting nearly all of our time and energy and resources into fighting Unison, we now had all this free time and energy and emotion to invest in fighting the university and win the terms and conditions. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to show the video, and then Gabriela will talk more about what we did in the end.